You know, Europe, the European Union, of course, it often thinks of itself as a progressive force. We hear a lot about the way in which Europe is the heart of civilization, the heart of progress, and maybe a leader in moving us towards a better world, a more cosmopolitan world, a world of the rule of law, and all that. But you know, Europe remains relatively parochial, and there's a much wider world out there. And the difficult questions that Europe is going to face in the future concern not some easy practice of universalizing its values across the face of the planet, but of trying to understand the way in which it relates to other parts of the world. The easy way for Europeans to think about the future is precisely through the trope of universalization, universal history, in which Europe basically swallows up everybody, or at least European values become universalized across the world. But Europe is never where it's supposed to be. Europe is already all over the world. Europe is already dispersed in many, many places, and many other places are dispersed in Europe. So we have already a situation in which Europe is in the world and the world is in Europe. But they are not, in neither case do we find here a simple universalization going on. What we've got is a series of complications in the boundary relations between Europe and everywhere else. Parts of Europe are in relations with parts of other places through some kinds of boundary relations. If we're talking about technology, for example, the boundaries, borders and limits of Europe and the rest of the planet are in different places and in different contexts and work in different ways than if we're talking about a political economy relationship. And if we're talking about relations of law, we're talking about something else again. If we're talking about cultural boundaries, we're talking about something else again. As I said at the very beginning, one of the most seductive things that we confront is that you know, you can make a simple balancing act between this and that, here and there. That is predicated upon the notion that there's a simple boundary between this and that, or here and there. And boundaries are not simple. They are intensely complicated practices. And much of what goes on in the world, in fact, occurs right within the boundary. Well, we live in a world of moving people, of moving capital, of moving ideas, moving technologies. But they're not all moving at the same pace. They're not all moving at the same place at the same time. We need to be much more sensitive to the complexities of what's going on at the limits, because it may be the case that our hope, much of our hope, rests in the decreasing plausibility of the grand exception, the great exception that pits us as friends and enemies across national territories. But we nevertheless find ourselves in a complex world in which we do make distinctions, we do authorize those distinctions, we do include, we do exclude, and we do include and exclude in ways which are not so familiar to us, but maybe in ways which are simply routinized, that's so routinized that we hand them over to the bureaucrats or the technicians, or indeed we just hand them over to people who think that they are acting for the greater good. We hand it over to those who are making claims about ethics, for example. So we are increasingly policed not by those who have guns and bombs or truncheons, but by people who simply have the capacity to make distinctions between those who deserve to come in and those who deserve to stay out. And that set of practices of making those distinctions and authorizing them and making them seem absolutely normal perhaps is one of the greatest challenges we confront, both conceptually and on a very practical, everyday political basis.